Welcome to Novelist Spotlight. This is Mike Consul, your host. In addition to being the host of this podcast and interviewing novelists, I am a novelist myself. I have 3 published novels. My latest is titled Lolita Firestone, a supernatural novel, and it is set in Sedona, Arizona and Cairo, Egypt. My previous novel is titled Family Recipes, a novel about Italian culture, Catholic guilt, and the culinary crime of the century. And my first novel is named Hardwood, a novel about college basketball and other games young men play. And that story deals with issues ranging from depression and racism to sex, religion, and university politics. All 3 novels are listed in the episode notes. I hope you will buy them, I hope you will read them, and I hope you will thoroughly enjoy them. Now, on with our program.
In the spotlight is Tyson Cornell. The wide-brimmed hat, the shades, the impassive visage, the taciturn and contemplative persona. Did this man take the red pill or the blue pill? In either case, where has it taken him? We'll attempt to delve into matters such as those during this episode, and here's why. Tyson Cornell is the founder and chief executive of Rare Bird, the Los Angeles-based book publishing house that he founded in 2010. And we want a deeper understanding from him of how a book publisher, a small independent book publisher, regards the business these days. Such a tough business, probably never been tougher, but there's never been more tools either, probably, to actually carry out the program. Now, he started Rare Bird after 9.5 years as marketing and publicity director at Book Soup, the famous bookstore in West Hollywood, California. And he worked with thousands of really legendary authors and political figures, cultural figures, people such as Norman Mailer, Joan Didion, Gore Vidal, Lauren Bacall, John Updike, Isabel Allende, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, George W. Bush, George H.W. Bush, Maya Angelou, Hunter S. Thompson, the gonzo journalist himself, and really more than 15,000 others. And interestingly, he studied ethnography at UCLA and California State University, Northridge. And ethnography, I actually had to look it up. I knew the word from before, but it's like, what does it really mean? It's the scientific description of the customs of individuals, peoples, and cultures. Tyson Cornell, thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you so much, Mike. Appreciate it. And I will just mention that the 15,000 plus authors really, is credited to events and book fairs that I coordinated, though I have worked with a lot of authors individually and hands-on over the years.
There you go. So the young Tyson Cornell studied ethnography, as I said. You carried out those studies again at UCLA and Cal State Northridge. What did you have in mind at the time in terms of a career? Why were you studying ethnography? It doesn't sound like a book publishing was on the agenda yet. So what were you thinking at that time?
Well, I wasn't career-minded at the time, but I had a sociology professor that wrote a dissertation on high-pressured auto sales. And I really got into this study and, just the full immersion of what he did in the field. And most of it was done on Van Nuys Boulevard here in San Fernando Valley. Not here, I'm not in the San Fernando Valley right now, but in Southern California. And it was the 70s, and there was a lot of cocaine and a lot of manipulation strategies. And it was really just an amazing look at the intersections of people in place and whatnot. And I took that idea, put myself at the street corner newsstand in Los Angeles. I worked at a bunch of outdoor newsstands, 24-hour newsstands, and one of them ended up being the Book Soup newsstand. It wasn't open all night at the time, and I didn't actually get much material for my studies from working at the Book Soup newsstand, but that ultimately led me to getting more into the book industry. But I really got into being on the street all night and interacting with the people and studying them and being a part of that. So
Wow.
you know.
Wow. So outside the Viper Room and outside Barney's Beanery and
Well,
meeting.
actually,
Yeah, go
the
ahead.
the newsstand that gave me the most material was the Laurel Canyon News, right over the hill from West Hollywood, Laurel Canyon and Ventura Boulevard, right on the cusp of Studio City. That really ended up being every night was something crazy. I mean, from the clientele, from people that would hang out there, just the intersections of life were really really amazing. So much of that I'm still when I drive by there today, I get nostalgic, but I really had to pull myself out of that environment because after a few years in college, as I drive by, no offense to one of my colleagues who I worked with back at Laurel Canyon News, but he's still there and he's still carrying the torch well over 20 years later.
There you go. Stick-to-itiveness. Yeah, all you have to do is watch TMZ to know that the streets of LA are pretty wild at night. So do high pressure sales tactics work? What about that paper that you were talking about? Was there any conclusion high pressure sales works or it does not work?
It does. And I think, I think everybody kind of has an experience with buying a car and having that be a comfortable process and an uncomfortable one. There are a lot of gender disparities that go into that. Even today, I still talk to people that, women who bring male friends to go buy cars because they don't want to be taken advantage of, things like that. But back then, back in the 70s, at that time, I mean, it was pretty interesting. I would love to just go back and read that. It was only on reference from the school library, so I couldn't take it out, but really interesting stuff.
I'll tell you just quickly a simple little process that some friends of mine told me about that they use. He would go, it's a married couple. My friend Todd would go to the dealership and he would negotiate with the sales guys. And he said, I got to talk to my wife. He'd call his wife, Tamara, who was at home. And they will tell you that the women is ultimately the woman's the decision maker on a car, usually. And he said he drives him crazy because he would keep calling the wife and they couldn't get to the wife. And she's not going to go for it, guys. She's just not going to go for it. You're going to have to do better than that. So he really put high pressure on them, kind of turned the tables on them and said, the key person you need to talk to, she's on the other end of the line and you can't reach her. I'm talking to her and I'll tell you, she's not sold.
Yeah.
So interesting technique that they said worked like magic for them when they would go buy a car. Let's talk about ethnography. You studied that. You're there on the streets of LA. I think it's fair to say you. When did you become a book lover? Were you always a book lover or not?
Yeah, I was.
You're a music lover as well, right? Are you a musician as well, or former musician, or just a music lover?
I'm a musician, a music lover, but first and foremost, I'm a book lover. It's complicated because the way I describe it is that I'm a book person first and foremost, but creatively I'm a musician, and it's I end up talking to my authors through the lens of a musician creatively, and that's just my process. But going all the way back, I mean, the book that I remember reading all the way through first was Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
That's a tough read too. I read that one. It was a tough read.
Yeah. And I've read it a few times, and I definitely, when I was first exposed to it, I just had a teacher that was really into it and singled me out and said, I got a book I want you to read, and I want you to read the whole thing, and I want you to come tell me what you think. And a few years after that, my dad gave me a credit card and said, you can buy any book you want as long as you read it all the way through. And I went just absolutely bonkers. And so much to the point where a few months after that, he had to pull me aside and start questioning me on all of the books that I was buying, because he didn't believe that I was reading all these books. And
when you say going bonkers, you went out and bought a lot of books and were reading a lot of books. Okay.
I did. I absolutely inhaled them. And, that's when I was first exposed to a lot of things that I did read and I understood in my own way. But, I was definitely reading Bataille at too young of an age.
Give us the ratio. What percentage was fiction versus nonfiction, and how has that ratio changed over the years, if at all?
I'm pretty split. I actually really don't think about the genre as I'm sorting through my reading list. I would say it's probably about 50-50, but I'm big into history. I'm big into biographies. And I'm also big into fiction. I don't want to be vague about an answer, but it's the same as musical styles. Like I don't approach my record collection thinking I want to listen to jazz or I want to listen to rock or metal. I just sort through and find stuff that, I haven't listened to this in a while. I want to check this out.
What are you reading right now?
Right now, I'm reading rereading this Bram Stoker bio that was, I'm blanking on the author's name, but he lives in Glendale, not too far away from me. And I've been tempted to reach out with questions, but it's really interesting. And then prior to that, I read an Edvard Munch bio and really got wrapped up in this interesting idea of, just how Munch lived his life split between two time periods in Norway. One where it was called Christiana, and really the Christians took over from the Vikings and changed the name of the city. And then strangely, in 1925, the Norwegians decided to change it back to the Viking name, which is Oslo. And so that's really kind of what the device of the biography uses that as. I guess a comparison would be studying Russian, Soviet, Eastern Bloc stories where it's before or after the wall fell, or when you look at Mishima in Japan and you study the opening up of the Japan to the Western world, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I'm reading right now, and you'll appreciate this. I'm reading My Effing Life by Geddy Lee, the co-founder and bass player for Rush. And I know you knew that, but for our listeners, interesting, long history with that band. They've been around, I don't know, 40 years or something, and they've never had a fight, literally never had a fight in all those years. He said, I know it's hard to believe, but it's true. And they've been able to stand the test of time. In large part, this dovetails with books. In large part because unlike other bands that would go out with the groupies or go partying afterward or glue television sets to the ceiling of their hotel room, those guys would go to their rooms and they'd read. They'd get their books out and would read. And it was really Neil Peart who got them going, because he everywhere he went, he had a stack of books. Then the other guys started, you have a lot of travel time and all that. So Geddy Lee spent a lot of that travel time doing a lot of reading. And I read mostly fiction, but I saw that one come across and I thought, my brother's reading it. He's a bass player. So I thought, it'd be cool to read something at the same time and we get to talk about it. Why did you decide to, why do you actually, I want to ask you one other question before I ask you why you decided to start a book publishing company. And that is, you say you're a musician. What instrument or instruments do you play, or do you sing? What's your gig?
well, in bands, I started out as a drummer, but then I moved to the front of the stage and became a singer guitar player. Mostly because I got frustrated trying to tell people what to play, and I realized it would be a lot easier if I had a guitar on rather than holding a pair of drumsticks. But I'm a multi-instrumentalist. I don't my limitations are I don't play any wind or brass or any of those instruments, which I would love to be able to play. I just didn't grow up playing those in school band and didn't pursue them later in life. And I have never formally played piano. But other than that, I spend a lot of time picking up different kinds of instruments, learning how to play them, and experimenting in the studio.
I envision you being a Bill Bruford or Alan White type on the Skins and David Gilmour on the sixth string. Anywhere close?
I wish I could play like those drummers. I think I've been listening to them for so long that when I get behind a kit, I do certain things that you can tell that I like that kind of music. And but I definitely need to work on a few rudiments. And playing drums is such a physical thing that you really kind of got to do it. I mean, at least 5 days a week to keep up your chops with that. But when I'm working on a project and I'm playing drums, I do realize that towards the end of the session, I get better and better. But I wouldn't compare myself to those guys. Funny you mentioned Gilmour. I would never say I can play as well as David Gilmour does, but lately I've been gravitating to a lot of Gilmour-esque areas with the guitar.
Nice.
So I particularly like a lot of his stuff, but I've been listening to his first solo record a lot over the last 2 years, and it's so restrained, which is really interesting. You expect him to be a lot more noodly on a debut solo album, but no, he's just feeling the vibe out and exploring the tones of his instruments, which is really refreshing.
There you go. So let's talk about the book publishing business. You started a book publishing company when it may never have been a tougher time to get started. I don't know the business so well that I can say that with certitude, but first of all, why did you start Rare Bird? What's the story behind the name? And this is a 3-part question. Why did you start it? What's the story behind the name? And is it tougher than ever to be an independent publisher, or is it actually a better time now than ever?
Well, I started publishing. This goes back to my Book Soup days, and the owner of Book Soup died of pancreatic cancer in early 2009, and backing up from there a few years, it was always an aspiration of Glenn to do some kind of publishing venture, not unlike a City Lights type of thing where a bookstore, also has a publishing presence. And Book Soup has a long history of being connected to people publishing books and only selling them at Book Soup, or it's only available at Book Soup. And so there was a little bit of a background there, but really, Glenn couldn't figure out what he wanted to publish, and whenever we would talk about it, we couldn't agree on what we'd like to do. His ideas I didn't like, and a couple of my colleagues that were involved in that conversation. We'd all get excited, but then we'd get frustrated because nobody could agree on what to do. So that never happened at Book Soup. However, the first book that I did end up publishing was Joseph Mattsson's Empty the Sun, which is this novel that was going to come out with a Random House imprint Um, and it had a soundtrack by this indie folk group called Six Organs of Admittance. And really the vision between the band and the author was for the album and the book to be on even playing field. And they increasingly grew frustrated that the people on the publishing side didn't seem to value the music at all. So thankfully the band had a following and sold a good amount of records when they released new material. So me and another Booksy colleague got together and took the project away and ended up publishing it. That wasn't Rarebird yet, but it was only a few months away. But that book was published under an imprint called Barnacle, a Barnacle book. And that's really the beginning, because Empty the Sun came out. It came out in 3 different editions, including a 12-inch vinyl soundtrack with the book printed on a 12 by 12 2-column insert. And that sold out in all formats within 90 days. And then we had people from the book industry saying, what are you guys going to publish next? And so my publishing partners went on to do other things, and I left Book Soup and was doing a lot with marketing services and event services and working with authors and publishers, but ended up continuing the publishing process. And the second book that we published, this now became Rarebird, was Girlbird, a porno memoir, which was the Rarebird perennial classic for a few years after that. So that was still as a Barnacle book, but under the Rarebird umbrella. And
why Rarebird?
Well, Rarebird goes back. It was kind of a running joke at the tail end of my Book Soup period, where we were working with John Updike on his last tour, and we got to spend a lot of really amazing nights hanging out with him, and he, at the time, I had this this strawberry blonde reddish beard, and he just kept joking that we should break off, me and one of my colleagues, that Scoobs, that was there at the time, we should start our own bookstore, call it Redbeard's Rarebird Bookstore. And it was just kind of a quirky joke that he had thought up and just kept prodding at me to do. So when I left Book Soup, people around me had already assumed that the name of the company would be somewhat connected to Redbeard or Rarebird or whatnot. So that's the backstory of it, and it just seemed like a natural, and nobody really put any, there weren't any lists of what should the company be called or whatnot. It's just, that's what people started referring to the operation as.
When you say it was Updike's last tour, was he dying of cancer already?
He was, yeah. And this I'm so embarrassed about, because John Hodgman, the author, was on tour at the same time, and I worked with John as well, and he would hit most of the same cities that Updike was on, and everybody knew that Updike had pneumonia on tour, and I was having such a good time hanging out with him and his wife, and selling books and just being a servant to the art, and he was sick, but I wasn't really paying attention to that. But everybody was asking me, including John Hodgman, where it's like, is Updike going to live through the tour and all this stuff? And one of the last things that I ended up saying before he died is that that guy's going to live another 20 years. And then he died, I think, a few weeks after that. So
he was expecting to live another 20. I remember I read his biography as well. Begley, the guy, Begley wrote that particular biography, and he had so many more plans. He was so energetic, and then all of a sudden he gets hit with this. He was, of course, anybody would be stunned, but when you have his level of energy and apparent fitness, and then to get in these future plans, and then all of a sudden, wham. So you were saying he's going to live another 20 years. Was John there when you said that?
I did say that multiple times in John's presence. Updike's presence, and but Hodgman kept asking me, like, are you sure he's gonna, like, how's Updike doing? Are you sure he's still going to live another 20 years? So that was going on for, I think, I want to say 2 or 3 weeks that they were kind of like side by side on tour together.
What was his mood like, knowing it was towards the end? Had he reconciled? Was he comfortable with his ultimate fate, which is the same fate we all have, really? But he knew this was marching towards him fairly quickly. What was his mood like, or was he real reflective about it? Did he talk about it at all?
He did. My memory, I don't remember talking about anything real mortal. He, the time that we spent, aside from talking about the works that he was discussing at his events, we would just, comb through editions of his books that a lot of them were from my library, and I had a lot of them annotated and my favorite lines underlined, and we would just read passages, and he would read passages to us, and we would just giggle together. So it was, I remember his mood to be very lighthearted.
Well, I'll tell you, my favorite Updike book is Villages. I just thought it was brilliant. That the critics did not really care for it, but I thought it was written with an energy and a creativity and a sexuality. I mean, he was always criticized about that he wrote about sex too much or whatever. I mean, it's mild by so many other measures, but and he's just got. I remember Philip Roth saying, no matter how much experience you have or how good you are, writing is always difficult. And he said, except for maybe John Updike. I had the same feeling. If you read John Updike's prose, it's kind of like, this just flows out. This is so easy for him.
Yeah.
I'm sure it wasn't, but I mean, he created that impression because his facility with the language and just the flow was such that it was kind of like, well, this guy's got some supernatural gift.
Yeah. Well, I agree with you, with the caveat that, I don't think it's easy. He makes it look easy.
Yes.
And I think he figured out his craft and how obviously he wrote over 60 books and has a nice catalog. But, this is a guy that I think, part of his drawback is that he woke up every day and wrote no matter what, whether he felt like writing or didn't, or at least this is we talked about these topics a little bit, and he said when he was stumped for ideas, he would just pick up a newspaper, and the second that he found an article that was intriguing, ideas would come, and that would be his next story or his next book or whatnot. So I really do respect that kind of creative,
commitment, really, don't you think?
Yeah, it's just a lifestyle of creating stuff. And, I take a lot of those similar things into my world, making books and making music where, there's no beginning, no end, and there's no apex, and there's no,
Exactly.
You
Exactly. It's
know,
infinite. It's the infinity
yeah,
symbol. And yeah, and there's peaks and valleys along the way and always
of
will
course.
be. So what about um, being in charge of a independent publishing company? Is it,
Mhm.
do you feel that today you've got, as I indicated at the top, you have more tools than you've ever had, or do you feel that it's tougher than it's ever been because there are a lot of people who do a lot of reading, but they do social media reading, or
Mm.
they're not reading books necessarily. How tough is it to be an independent publisher these days vis-a-vis 50 or 100 years ago? Not that you would have a clear view of that,
Yeah,
but you know the difficulty of today.
yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I wasn't around 50 or 100 years ago, but I I do think that it is a lot more difficult. And for all the advantages that we have in publishing right now, I mean, one of them is just that typesetting is a lot easier, design is a
Yes.
lot easier, proofing, manufacturing is a lot easier in some ways, but I would argue that that isn't necessarily a good thing. Um, but yeah, no, I would say in a lot of ways it's not really sustainable if you look at it through the lens of publishing books as a primary mode of servicing the writing that is in the books. And what I mean by that is just our perspective now, just by necessity and survival, is that we look at it more as IP, where the writing is of course important, but it's the world and it's the experiential element that comes from what's created. So, I mean,
You
as an
said IP,
example, yeah,
intellectual
intellectual
property.
property. Yeah,
Okay.
I mean that's really how I mean, a lot of this discussion started to happen years ago when ebooks came about, and are you print or digital? These are the same conversations that happened when the CDs came and the VHS Betamax tapes came and whatnot. But really, these are you know and I think writers would agree as well that the work is what matters. The medium isn't so important, but obviously the experience that one has reading uh, with a physical book rather than an ebook versus listening as an audiobook. I mean, there are just so many different factors. It's almost as if I mean, you can't really compare the two. You know, similar to comparing an adaptation of a book to film. It's
Mm.
like there's so many factors that go into consuming it in different ways. But I see that when I'm working with authors that they I mean they're expressing themselves on the page, but they do have greater ideas. They in their mind the characters live and walk freely. They're not limited to just a device. So getting back to the functionality and the business of publishing, I think it's a really amazing opportunity because with technology we do have the opportunity to do things in a more democratized manner as far as exploring the different avenues of what we do. One of which is that we have a vinyl audiobook line that we have gotten really creative with over the years, and we do soundscapes and full scores, and um, take the music side of what's complementary to the audio narration and the words to some interesting levels. I mean, so much to the point where we just spent a few months working on some pretty eclectic music for an audiobook, and then the decision was finally made today that it's too heavy-handed. It's taking too much of a center stage from the from the story and the narration, and it's just competing a little bit too much, and
Mm.
and that's fine. But what I like about that situation is that it shows that we're pushing the limits creatively on what can be done with creative literary works.
Interesting. Now you publish 50 titles a year, is that correct?
Yeah, yeah, about that, and about 20 or 30 records a year.
And the records these are bands or performers who produce an album, and you'll publish it for them.
Well, some of them are music releases that have no connection to books, but most of them are vinyl audiobooks.
I see.
So they're companions to the books, and then they're always done in a creative manner that's different from the main audiobook. Or sometimes we change the text a little bit, sometimes we use stories that aren't in the actual printed book.
Now, I notice on your website, you do not accept submissions, unsolicited submissions. Do you have literary agents who come to you and say, hey, we're representing an author? Or is it that you are actually targeting people whose work you want and asking them to write something, or they've written something? Do you take any outside input at all from, say, agents or what have you?
We do work with agencies, and have good relationships with a lot of agents, and I love the great agents out there. Anything I say after this is no criticism in that world, but by the nature of the kind of company we are, and the size company we are, we did have an epiphany a number of years ago where we just realized that it was more likely that the books we were getting pitched by agents were way down the line, and most of the stuff, by the time it gets to us or any smaller independent company, it's already been passed on by 20, 30 plus publishers. So that can be worthwhile in some ways. There are situations where a book has been passed on by everybody, and then it gets to us, and it seems like this is the right fit, and it's a great work, deserves to be out in the world, and other publishers just didn't get it as much.
Or they already had something in that channel that they publish. I understand that's very much the way it works. Is like, we've already got a product in this channel, or a couple products in the channel, and this one's better, but it doesn't make a difference because we're already committed.
Yeah, there are a lot of political and situational issues that go on. I mean, the bigger the company, the more you're going to have that, because then there are more competing titles. The same way a studio system, has a lot of those conflicts with scripts and whatnot. But yeah, I mean, we do still work with a lot of great agents, and we're always open to that. But
and certain agents probably that who you trust, and this person understands what I'm looking for. Where there's a lot of agents who are bringing you stuff that's kind of like they don't really get what we do.
Well, I mean, we don't really even have those conversations with people just because we don't have time. But the agents that we like and work well with and respect, and we may not ultimately do any deals, but there's a professional courtesy, and we are trying to figure out something that does make sense. But our primary way of acquiring projects is we go out and plant the seeds, and we do a lot of just living in the lifestyle of books and the different worlds, and we're readers, and we're often reading things and contacting people and coming up with ideas, saying, hey, interesting to do something like this. And 2 years later, we get a call from saying, hey, remember when we had dinner and we were joking about how, such and such a project would be interesting. Well, I got excited, and over the summer I wrote that. And do you want to publish it? There's a lot of that kind of stuff, but we just think it's a lot more fruitful for us as a company to come up with our own ideas and acquire books as much as we can that never even hit the market.
Now, how do you know which ideas, though? How much of it is we need to sell books to stay in business? And
Yeah.
I know my audience well enough to know or the reading audience well enough to know this, or is it more along the lines of, I want to publish what I want to read, that I want to get some material out there that maybe isn't represented at all? How much of it is capitalism, and how much of it is art?
Well, it's mostly capitalism, but we have to stay sane, and we also have to use what's in our toolbox. And though my general reading taste is usually a little too abstract for commercial publishing, but we are a small company, and we don't necessarily need every success story to be a New York Times bestseller. We can have a lot of success publishing books that sell a good amount of copies, but don't really get reviewed or whatnot. So, it's kind of a complicated.
I was going to say, give us some titles that you have been that they've been successful for you, either financially or artistically or both.
Yeah, well, we have 2 novels by this guy Keith Buckley, Watch and Scale. Those, I don't think either of those books have reviews, and they have both sold very, very well. This book called The Ultimate Anti-Cancer Cookbook, which we published, I want to say in 2013, that just has been a sleeper that just continues to have its own place. And, it ebbs and flows in different ways. But Girlvert, as I mentioned, that was a book that lots of other publishers back in 2011, 2012 were interested in, thought was great, but the subject matter was just a little too abrasive. And, it deals with the adult film industry. And, the most common feedback that we get was that, if a major publishing house tried to publish this, there's no way it would be able to do it justice. I don't think that's necessarily true. I think it doesn't really matter how big the company is versus the risk taking. But we publish it, and I think for the first 5 years of our existence, it was our bestseller, and with our distributor, it was the number 2 nonfiction title for 2 years in a row.
You mentioned Keith Buckley, and the most recent Bird is the Word email that you sent out, which I receive. And listeners, Bird is, if you go to the Rare, and the URL is in the episode notes, but if you go to the Rare Bird website, you can sign up for Bird is the Word email. The most recent one features Keith Buckley, who Tyson was just talking about. And they described him as a Scorpio of Polish descent. My being a Scorpio myself, I like that. I'm not Polish, but I like that you I identified him in that way. And went on to talk about how he's spent the past 25 years touring with multiple bands, but he's also written these novels. Scale, you mentioned, Watch as another one you mentioned, and then most recently Help, with 2 L's in it.
Yeah.
And then you go on to ask him a series of questions, such as, who is your favorite artist? If your style of writing were a music genre, what would it be? What music should readers listen to while reading your writing? Interesting questions that he answers. And talk a little bit about Bird is the Word,
Mm.
the email that you send out. How helpful has that been to introducing your authors and promoting some sales?
It's actually been great, and I got to give credit to Cassidy Cooley, who worked with us on that last year. She's gone on to work primarily with Unnamed Press, which is another independent publishing house. But she got that started and was really enthusiastic about exploring our backlist primarily. And she just noticed that we do have a lot of interesting books that were published, between 2 and 10 years ago, that deserved revisiting. And so the Keith Bird is the Word was an interesting process, but some of the other ones, have gone back, interviewed agents and editors, former employees that were instrumental in bringing the project to us. And it is interesting to just see the life of a book, something that we haven't gone into, that maybe I don't even want to, but what immediately comes to mind are expectations. I think if you ask Keith, he'd probably say the book exceeded expectations in some ways and didn't in others. But I definitely look at him as a success story, because it's really hard to take musicians who are writing fiction, even if they're extremely well read and legitimate in what they're pursuing, but convincing people that they have the chops to do what they're doing. The way I would maybe try to compare that is, when you have an actor that, puts out an album or something like that, or when John Bon Jovi starts acting or whatnot, it does take a while for people to, yeah, maybe Kevin Costner is a great guitar player, but he's, in people's brains, they still think of him as an actor, and that's hard to overcome. So, it's easy to look at somebody like Keith and say, oh, well, publishing him is easy. He just has all these fans. Yes, but his fans don't necessarily know they want to buy a novel yet. And, they're used to buying records.
Right, right. What don't you? I will see I'm thinking more in terms of literary agencies where they say we don't represent children's books, so we don't represent cookbooks, so we don't represent this or that. Do you have certain genres or subject matter that is kind of your wheelhouse, and there's other stuff that you just say we're really not interested in that?
Right. Well, I mean, yeah, I'll get into specifics, but before that, I'll say that, there are things that we maybe just don't have the knowledge to publish properly, and we think that somebody else would do a better job. And that's always first and foremost. I mean, if the project is a sure bet, and we know that we're going to sell a ton of books and it's going to make us a lot of money, fine. Then, we're happy just saying, yeah, we're experts in that, and we'll figure out how to become experts and publish this properly later. But really, publishing books is similar to writing. It's just it's a big commitment, takes a lot of work, and if the shoe doesn't fit properly, it isn't good for anybody. So there are a lot of really good projects that have come across my desk that I've referred to other publishers, not because I didn't want to publish them, but because I thought that they could publish them better, and they've reciprocated with Rare Bird as well. The second part of that, there are some things that I don't think will go deep into. I've been pitched a number of KKK wizard memoirs over the years, and I just don't know if I can spend 2, 3, 4, 5 years of my life dealing with that every day.
Mm-hmm.
So it isn't so much, do we have a rule about what we publish or not publish, but do we want to spend every day of our life for the next 3 years immersed in that world?
Right. Right.
That said, I mean, the rare bird list is pretty eclectic, and there are a lot of books on our list that have politics that none of us agree with. And, we publish murderers and, people that, I would even sometimes question about even hanging out with. But, I do feel that, it isn't the publisher's job to make those judgments and calls. I mean, we're here servicing the art and the word, and for our decision-making process is it's really about, does this book need to be out into the world, and are we the right publisher to do it?
Here is a question that I picked up from Wallace Stegner. I just read his novel, Crossing to Safety. And of course, he didn't put it this way in the novel, but it was, here's a representation of it, but in the form of a question: do you publish books or do you publish authors?
It's funny you mentioned that, because I bring that philosophy up a lot, and we publish authors. Yeah, I mean it's a lot of work to ramp up with an author. There's like the get to know you period, the trust, the flow of everything, and the intention is always to publish subsequent works, and that's really the only way in the long term to make publishing viable. If we were starting over from scratch every single time, it would just be too laborious. But also, I mean, creatively, as far as authors are concerned, I mean, authors are the product, and the books are the extension of those. And I mean, and the books matter, but they're, I mean, they wouldn't be anything without the creators, and that's where I hold my allegiance to.
Talk about the business model. How does Rare Bird make money, and to what end? Well, to what end? Obviously, you need to stay in business. Obviously, you want to make a living at it. But what is the business model? How does it work?
Well, primarily we develop and publish literary properties, whether they're physical books, ebooks, audiobooks, and we distribute those all over the world. Extensions of those, we license out our rights through subsidiary rights, and then adjacent to that, we do extended services and consulting, and that makes up about 90% of our business model and revenue flow.
So when you started out, you probably had a business plan of some kind. A lot of times people say business plans never survive. It's almost like a battle plan in a war never survives the first battle. It's constantly making adjustments. So you come out with a business plan, and then you rewrite that business plan along the way, because the realities on the ground they edify a person along the way, and changes are made. How close is the and then there's the rare occasions. I think probably Fred Smith with FedEx was one of them. Those rare instances where the business plan survives it all. It was spot on from the beginning. What does the business plan at Rare Bird look like today versus its original iteration?
Well, in some ways it's very similar, and not much has changed. The ideas of diversified revenue streams, that was all right there from the beginning. I just felt that the only way that we were going to survive doing the things that we wanted to do in this space were to have different means of doing them. So, there are a lot of our publishing peers that are just there to publish books and rely solely on their the revenue that they receive from distribution sales, and we've always been focused on having multiple different activities and streams. So I think that's been good and kept us afloat in a lot of ways, and just makes us more expansive. Past the question of, are we in the horse and buggy business?
Or the transportation business.
Sure. Yeah. Or that. The things that have changed. Well, I think early on we were a lot more naive with our acquisitions. That's probably very obvious, and probably every publishing company. But we did kind of a tabletop flip where, maybe the first 5 years or so, 80 or 90% of our titles were platform building, is how I would describe them, where, we were starting with 0 fans and expected to build entire careers. And that proved to be unsustainable. And so now we're essentially flipped, where, the majority of what we acquire and pursue have already established some form of momentum. And we look at it as our job to build on that. So on the entertainment book side, not including novels, like when we're doing musician autobiographies or whatnot, we have the base fans that are going to buy the book no matter what, but then we focus primarily on adapting that story to people who aren't fans of the bands or of the musicians and whatnot, even if they're huge, famous household names, And I think, that's really what breaks a lot of these books out into the mainstream, is getting beyond the fandom. When we do a book with Sean Penn or Nikki Sixx from Motley Crue, success to us is breaking off into the part of the book buying public that doesn't care about the band or the actors' films or whatnot. They just want a good story, and that's really our role in that respect. So that role reversal was a big crucial one. I wish I could go back in time and realize that sooner. But
lessons learned, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Now you're doing about 50 titles a year. Do you see that number growing, or are you comfortable at that level for the foreseeable future?
We're comfortable with this. We've done a lot of number crunching and exploring, and quantity isn't necessarily the recipe for our ongoing success. We could publish 50 books a year, easily for the next 20 or 30 years, and just grow on those titles. There's a lot of room for, even though we have titles that we're very proud of sales wise, there's no reason why those sales couldn't multiply by 10 or 20 or 30 times.
And then, if you're doing 50 a year, after 4 years, you've got 200 out there. And so you have the long tail out there, where, over the years, you I mean, the number builds and the sales, the
Uh-huh.
sales, overall sales build. And then you see these books that suddenly people discover them late and
Hmm.
they catch fire.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, 50, you think of it as 50 a year and it's like, yeah, that's not a lot of titles compared to the big houses. But on the other hand, when you're doing 50 a year consistently, next thing you know, you're into the hundreds and eventually thousands of
Well,
titles.
I mean, when you look at the different publishing houses and the real mass quantities, they're all broken down into different imprints and different departments. So, if we were able to grow or expand, we would likely expand just the same way other publishing companies expanded before us. They would just start new imprints and whatnot. But there isn't really a publishing house that publishes thousands of books a year with one department.
Hmm.
Those are always broken down into little, usually based off the subject matter. Okay, well, we'll break all the avant-garde fiction titles, since we have 180 that we need to publish this year. We'll break them off into this own little
Into
series
Penguin,
section.
like Penguin. Is it a
Exactly.
penguin or not? Maybe it's not a penguin. Maybe it's a Viking or.
Yeah, I mean, there are obviously political reasons and business reasons that things are subcategorized, but a lot of it is, I'll use for an example, a lot of publishing houses will have bigger publishing houses will have the conservative or the super left wing um, imprints. And so if something comes along that's very conservative politically, editorial just automatically suggests, well, talk to the editors at, I won't name names, but those
That
departments.
does the conservative political stuff. They
Exactly.
specialize in that. Um, so are you a virtual company or do you guys have a storefront? Do you have an office that everybody reports to, or are you working virtually?
Well, I wouldn't say we're a virtual company. Um, we've always been a brick and mortar operation. We have an office. We now own a bookstore in Highland Park area of Northeast Los Angeles.
What's the name of the
We have two
bookstore?
North Figueroa Bookshop.
Okay.
We have two recording studios. Um, and, you know, but since COVID, all of our editorial team works remotely, and it's been better that way. The newsroom style. I mean, we just realized how, I mean, it's nice to see people, but editing books isn't really a social thing.
Yeah.
And during COVID, I realized that, I mean, people were more productive and they were happier. They were happier to have their own lives. They were happier not to have to commute. And I'm surprised we didn't do that earlier. So, so we have some people that come into the office, and we have some people that don't, and that's part of that's preference. I mean, obviously, if people want to come in, they can, and most drop in every once in a while. But our staff is great. We've had our current staff for a while now, and everybody knows how to do what they do. And I think most of the time when we have our meetings, we talk more about the books that we're reading and the movies that we're watching than actual work.
Hmm. No, do you usually work at home or the office?
I don't work at home.
So
I
when you go into
can't.
the office, what's the first thing you do upon arrival? Is there anything ritualistic about your arrival at the office?
Well, I get up usually without an alarm before 4 a.m. Just I'm an early riser. I make coffee. I'm usually out of the house in 15 minutes, and I lurk around the neighborhood and think about things. I make calls back east and to Europe. Then I get into the office and um, usually just tend to a lot of the crucial stuff, the stuff that I really need to think about, contracts, legal stuff. That's all my first AM stuff. And then by the
What's
time
lurking
anybody
around the
else,
neighborhood mean? So you're looking around, is that your thinking time where you're just
hmm
is that right? Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Is it channeled at all, or are you kind of free flowing at that time? Whatever thoughts may come,
yeah,
let these thoughts assert themselves, or do
yeah.
you? Yeah, that's what it is. Not a channel thing. Like I want to kind of cogitate on such and such while I walk up and down, the street and drink my coffee.
Oh yeah, no, that's the time I value most in the day. The hour to 2 hours before the sun comes up. And if I miss that, if for some reason I sleep through it or whatever, then I just feel like I'm not able to catch up the rest of the
Yeah.
day. So I really that's my, for lack of a better term, meditation time. And that's when I can think the clearest. And I'll have a whole night sleeping to think about the crucial decision making, and then that early morning time is when I make the quote unquote decision.
So what's the last thing you do before leaving the office?
Um, I well, most of the day is reserved for discussion and creative stuff, and the last thing I always do is usually share uh, things with people that are in my inner circle that I feel will appreciate what we're working on. And a lot of that just comes from excitement, whether it's new edits to something or new designs or mixes from something on the audio front. I mean, that's usually what I'm usually waiting for something to sync with our Dropbox so I can send somebody a link. And then I get in my car, and then I usually am having a phone call with one or more people that I sent that to driving home. And that's almost every day.
So how
So
many
that
hours a week do you work?
uh I mean, for me it's a lifestyle. I don't know.
It doesn't start and
I'm
finish for
it's not
you.
no, yeah, it's not
It's all your waking hours, so it's a continuum. Even
exactly.
when you're sleeping, you go to bed I
Yeah.
mean, does this work for you where there are
Uh-huh.
people who say, look, if you have a problem you're trying to solve, think about it as you're falling asleep and you'll
Yeah.
wake up with an answer in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly it. I mean, I don't think I'm a workaholic. I just stumbled into doing what I love. And, you know, I mean, I take time out and hang out with my family and and some other people. I mean, usually my friends are, somehow intertwined with projects that I do. So that isn't so much of an issue.
Let's say you're interested in you mentioned Nikki Sixx. Let's say you it could have been Geddy Lee before he went and wrote
Mhm.
his. I think that's kind of a second memoir. But if you had approached Geddy and said, God, look at the enduring career you've had, the band, and you as a person, and so on. Um, I'd like you to write a autobiography. If they said, "Why should I sign up with Rare Bird vis-a-vis anybody else?" What would your answer be when you're targeting somebody and they say, "But okay, I like the idea of writing a book, or I am going to write a book, but why Rare Bird? Give me the elevator pitch."
Well, I don't usually get involved with those conversations. I mean, obviously, I can talk about the advantages uh, of working with us, certain expertise that we have, curatorial value that we bring to the table, design and aesthetic that we bring in. with musicians, there really aren't that many people in the publishing industry that are players, for instance. You know, there are some. Johnny Temple from Akashic is a seasoned musician that's also a publisher. But it's hard for people on the music side to find people in publishing that get that speak that language. So that's definitely an advantage. You know, for whatever reason, I mean, I look at more of it more as a matchmaking thing, and I've passed on a lot of really amazing opportunities, and I've decided not to pursue things that I think could have been really fruitful, because I think we're just the type of company where, either people get it or they don't. And I don't like playing the bidding game. I don't participate in bidding wars. When I hear from an agent that there's an auction on a book, my first reaction is that I'm out. I don't want the decision making to be based off of an offer or an advance amount or some kind of dating game scenario. And part of that is that, I don't, if that's the decision-making process, I don't think that author is going to have a great experience with our company. But people that know what we do, get our vibe right away and go, no, I know where they're coming from, and I'm going to get along with these people. Those are the people we want to work with. And if I have to put on a song and dance pitching what our personality is, it just seems counterproductive.
I see. What is the personality? I mean, maybe I'm asking an impertinent question based on what you just said, but I mean, is a rare bird an introvert, an extrovert? Is it Zen-like? Is it extravagant? What kind of an adjective might you apply to, or a few that you would apply to what rare bird is as a culture?
Well, I mean, it stems from reading and being a recipient of the creative process. I don't think we could. I mean, I'm an introvert. And any time that I'm out there being extroverted, it's sucking the life out of me. And I could easily live in the Arctic. But I think that it's that. I mean, we're fans of what we're supporting. We're here because we're trying to serve the art, and that's first and foremost. When we're in a groove with an author, aside from being human, we're always going to go above and beyond. We may make mistakes along the way. We may get distracted by certain real life situations, but we're lifers. We don't look at working with our authors in a seasonal manner where, let's see if the book succeeds in the first 3 months, and if it doesn't, then you'll never get a return call from us.
Right. You see it as a long process.
It is. Yeah.
It is a long process. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you spent, as I said at the top, you spent almost 10 years as marketing and publicity director at Book Soup, the bookstore in West Hollywood.
Yeah.
What marketing and publicity, did you learn some marketing publicity strategies there that worked well, that you extrapolated for Rare Bird? Or is this just really such a different sort of endeavor that it's not necessarily transferable.
It's very similar, but I would say that, I went into the book soup world, bringing ideas there. Obviously, I learned a lot, but I come from a DIY background with music. As a teenager, I was putting out my own records and touring around in, it is more of a do-it-yourself method of doing things, and that's, those are one of the marketing tactics that I brought into Book Soup was, I ramped up the events programming schedule because I had a philosophy of book it like a club. And, there are some problems with that, but essentially I looked at the calendar and I was like, okay, well, if we're already paying somebody for 8 hours to do one event, let's schedule 3 back-to-back events, pay the same payroll, and then we'll have and those are just tactics that I brought in from my earlier days with DIY music. So the things that I learned from Book Soup and those that transferred here are really the hardline realities, which are, just because you have a great author, even a huge author, and you tell the world about it, doesn't mean people are going to show up. So you have to think up a lot of extensive safeguards to make sure that, the planetary alignment of success is going to happen. And, when you're doing events for presidents and celebrity authors, there's no room for failure.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If nobody shows up because it's, the Lakers are in the playoffs, or it's the season premiere of Lost, or it's a State of the Union address, it's never going to be the author's fault. It's never, and you have to be able to orchestrate that. And, I think that's probably applicable to everything in life,
Mm-hmm.
but most importantly to publishing books and promoting them.
So you say that Rare Bird aims to push boundaries. I'm taking that off your website. In what ways do you attempt to push boundaries?
Well, we're on a daily basis, trying to rethink why we're doing things and what the purpose is of publishing a book or working with an author. And oftentimes, the roadblocks that come into play, we just try to make lemonade out of that stuff and push them into other areas. And oftentimes they're into figuring out ways to be a lot more creative. And that's really essential to, going back to earlier part in the conversation, that, books are cool. And, whether you're a rock band on tour and having a lot of options of things to do with your time, I still believe that, nothing's cooler than digging into a great book. And I don't mean that sarcastically. And so, whatever creative ways we could figure out to convince people that that's true. Authors are the real rock stars. And poets, I think, are the real rock stars.
Have you noticed? Oh, I'm sorry. Finish that thought, Tyson.
No, that's fine. That's what goes through our mind on a day-to-day basis is, we're here. Maybe the expectations are put on ourselves, or that we have to just keep on upping the ante of what it is to be publishers and what we need to do without reinventing the wheel.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the most encouraging things I've seen is that when I watch Netflix or Prime or Max, Apple TV, you name it, uh, these series and movies, the incredible number of them, a very high percentage of them come from books. They're
Hmm.
coming from novels. They're coming from, and I'm not sure if they just feel that we have a built-in audience with that, because in some cases these are not books that were necessarily huge sellers, but they saw the value in the content. They saw the value in the concept. And there's just so much material being produced for TV and the screen, for the big screen and the small screen.
Hmm.
And it seems that they look to published authors, particularly novelists, more and more than ever.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there are a lot of great books out there, and I think it's a natural place to go for great creative content. But there's also just there's a thing about the printed word and reading the printed word that, the process that ideas go through, taking it from a person's brain and getting it onto the page and transferring that to another person's brain, that you can't get anywhere else. I mean, and part of it has to do with the focus that's needed. It's different from listening to music where you can do other things. You can do the laundry while you're listening to a song or an album. Same with movies, film, TV shows and whatnot. You don't really have to engage as much. But with reading books and stories, I mean, you have to be an active participant. And that just brings so much more out of the reader and out of the work. And I think that's really the magic of it that, you can't get anywhere else. So I'm biased.
Well, I am too. And that involvement you're talking about, and I've said this before, that when you're watching something on the screen, it's a movie, it's a TV show, a TV series, whatever it might be, the director's making all the choices. So you really do very little work. You're very passive in watching it. Where anytime I read something, I'm a co-creator because
Yeah.
they are giving me some marks of distinction of a character and I'm filling the rest out. I'm
Yeah.
seeing that character. That's why it's so frustrating to go to read The World According to Garp and then go to the movie and Robin Williams is Garp. And I'm like, that's
Mm-hmm.
Robin Williams. I love Robin Williams, but he's not Garp. I'm sorry. That's terrible casting. The guy's not macho enough to be Garp.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah, I'm with
it
you.
really is
Yeah.
a completely different experience, as you say. See, I listen to a lot of audiobooks because I read all day for my job,
Sure.
and that is a type of reading, or that listening is where I actually can do other things while I'm doing that, and
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't require me to, well, although I read all day long and I'm fixated to that, but it is, audiobooks are quite popular these days with a lot of people, but it doesn't require the undivided attention that you're talking about. And that is, it's, you could almost make the argument that reading is a form of meditation. And it's also very an ancient form of communication when you think about it, because it's really hieroglyphics.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're symbols that we understand and we absorb. And of course, then we take it to a higher level because once we absorb it, then our brain is going to work on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, definitely.
So
Yeah. I
what do
mean,
you,
it's
yeah, go ahead.
I mean, we could have long conversations just on that topic, but I think it'll forever remain, you know, a mystery as a whole as to what, that magic.
Do you write?
Yeah, I do. You know, I can, and I do daily, and I do daily in relation to my job. But then I also, I'm a creative person. I'm able to pawn ideas off onto other people and have them run with them. But But I don't walk into a bookstore and fantasize about my name being on a book.
You prefer to
And
read it than to do all the hard work of writing of writing
well,
it necessarily.
creating, it's, I think that creative people have, true creative people have a compulsion. They're creating because they're compelled to.
Mm-hmm.
I know in my life, when I have rhythms and melodies in my head that just won't go away, I need to record them. I need to go through that process to flesh them out, get them down, so to speak, and then the voices go away. And then they're obviously replaced with other rhythms and melodies, and then that's a never-ending cycle. But I think that, I have that with stories and books and whatnot, and eventually I'm going to have to write more on my own to put those ideas down so they don't just dance around in my head as much. But I don't, I don't have aspirations of being an author.
Gotcha. So let's talk about the hardest part of your job and the most exhilarating part. Is there a particular, and maybe you don't have an answer for this, but I'm wondering if there's a particular activity that you would say that's where I would prefer to spend most of my time. It energizes and exhilarates me. And then maybe the hardest part where it's maybe enervating and you just as soon delegate that.
Well, going in reverse, the hardest part for me is dealing with ego and expectation. That's always a daily topic and issue and concern. And
Whose ego and whose expectation? Your own or the people, the authors that you have to work with?
Sometimes it's mine. I maybe go into certain projects expecting certain things from the author-publisher relationship, and those aren't achieved or they aren't shared. But mostly, it's I grew up playing in bands, so I understand the dynamic. But it's the greater conversation of why people are doing things, and what is the quantifier that makes that worthwhile. In any given morning, I could have 3 different phone calls back to back. One is having a conversation with an author where they sold 500 books and they're thrilled because they didn't have any expectations. Of course, I'm disappointed by 500 books, but then the next call is 50,000 copies, and they're disappointed because they expected 60,000 copies to sell. And very rarely, is there just a straight conversation where people are genuinely just at ease with things. A lot of authors think that it's a good thing to say to a publisher, I don't care what it sells. I hear that a lot when I ask authors, what do you want from the publishing process with this book? And they say, well, I don't care about sales. And then I usually end up saying, well, that's probably the last thing you should tell a commercial publisher. Though we care about you and your book, it has to justify its own existence first before we can celebrate the other things. So that those are the disappointing things, and I just, it's a part of the job. I'm sure it's a part of a lot of people's jobs, but especially this one where people, write for 10 years to publish a book, and, no matter how many copies it sells, it never seems to be enough.
Right, right. What about exhilaration? What part of your normal activities or a activity that you find most enjoyable?
Uh, Most enjoyable, which I think I have a particular knack for, which is looking at projects and being able to immediately try and separate the noise from the valuable components. So that's what I spend a lot of my time in the process doing. It's like, okay, well, we don't need to worry about that. Let's just clear that out. Let's only focus and just figuring out what is the primary thing that we need to be working on. And it's, we don't always succeed in that, and we often get derailed through the process. But it's most exhilarating to me when that works, when we're able to um, clear out some major obstacles that probably would have, you know, derailed the project for a year or two, and not even gone there. So, I mean, that's a lot of my directorial role in this process. It's not what the author's thinking about. They're in the weeds creatively with the characters. They aren't looking at the project from an aerial point of view. The sales reps are looking at their own thing. Editorial's looking at what they look at. It's my job to really kind of, pull that together. And sometimes it's canceling projects, just having some feelings and realizing that even though we've worked on this for a year and a half and spent a lot of time, energy, and money, and it's going to disappoint people, just wasn't meant to be.
Mm.
So I know it's a strange thing to add to the exhilarating component of my job, but that's where I find purpose with this. That's my unique role in this process, and it's exhilarating to me when I can actually achieve that.
Well, Tyson, you give me a lot of your time. But before we sign off, I did want to ask if there's an activity, a ritual, a strategy that best triggers your own creativity when you're looking to be creative. I mean, you're a creative person, but obviously, when you're really trying to get into the creative channel, is there anything you do that, um, again, a activity, ritual, or strategy that heightens your creativity for a when the time comes to elevate?
Well, I don't do it primarily to elevate, but I mean, I just drink a lot of coffee.
I'm a coffee drinker too. I do that too. Are there any other substances that do you boost your creativity at all with cannabis or with
No,
ketamine or with you stick strictly
no,
with the coffee bean and your own gray matter.
yeah, no other substances. But I I usually don't feel motivated to eat anything unless it's exactly the cuisine that I'm thinking of. I would almost rather forego lunch or dinner if it wasn't what I was exactly in the mood for. And I connect that to the coffee.
And how wide-ranging is your palate in terms of cuisines? Do you have a handful of favorites, or are you very broad in that, but you get fixated on a particular dish that you know that you want that day or that time?
Well, I don't eat tongue or tripe, um,
I don't blame
but
you.
yakitori I'm always in the mood for.
What is that?
But it's Japanese chicken prepared in a particular way. It's usually almost every part of the chicken, from the throat to the heart to the soft bone. I mean, the whole thing,
Wow.
and lots of marinade and special charcoal that goes into the process. That you know I can eat anytime, and unfortunately there aren't as many genuine, authentic yakitori places, and the ones that are there, if you don't go there on a regular basis, it's really hard to get a table. But that's always motivating for me when I can eat great yakitori. Everything seems to run smoother, and I get a lot of great creative ideas. So that's my cocaine.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Tyson, thanks a million for taking the time. Like I said, you've been generous with your time. I think we've been talking for more than an hour and a half now. So, but really thoughtful and interesting stuff. And I've been looking forward to this. We scheduled it months ago. I've been looking forward to this,
Yeah.
and you definitely delivered. Thanks so much for your time and all the information you've imparted.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate you proposing the discussion, and it's been a long time since we've seen each other. We were in San Francisco the last time in
Exactly.
Japantown, if
That's
I remember
right.
right. Yep.
I do.
Speaking of
Yeah.
yakitori, so
You were high
maybe
on yakitori at the time.
yeah. Maybe we'll have to revisit that, and I can introduce you to the yakitori arts.
Well, I'm a vegetarian, so I'll do something a little a side dish.
Well, you're in luck because part of yakitori is vegetables. Uh,
Perfect.
so a lot of skewered okra and mushrooms and lots of amazing goodies.
There's the ticket for me. Okay. Thanks again, Tyson, and
Likewise,
I'll catch you down the road.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much.